From the moment it was released a few years ago, the Kia EV6 was a fantastic electric car. It's just had a facelift, so now, is it even better? In this review, we're running you through all of the changes and finding out. So, the EV6 is an electric SUV that's practical, good to drive, has a decent range, and now it's got new looks, an updated interior, a new battery, and new tech. Let's go through these changes in a bit more detail now, starting with the styling. And you can see basically at the front here, the EV6 has now been brought more in line with what the EV9 and also the upcoming EV3 and EV5 look like. So you have a fancy new headlight design, and on GT Line and GT Line S models, you can have this light bar on the front of your EV6 as well. And on those models, these LED lights are adaptive as standard. Another change at the bottom here, this bit has been made to be a bit bigger than it was before to make the car look a little bit more aggressive from the front. At the rear, you can see this contrasting gloss black panel has got slightly sharper edges than it did previously, which again gives it a slightly sportier look than before, but overall, these styling changes aren't particularly drastic. And the shape, the dimensions of the car are the same as it was before, which means that the EV6 is still kind of difficult to pin down into one electric car category, because particularly looking in pictures, you might see the sloping roofline, the dramatic styling, and think this is kind of like a coupe or a massive hatchback. But if you do want to fit the EV6 into one particular category, we think it makes most sense to compare this against other electric SUVs, because after all, this is a massive car. And that means it's got a lot of quality competitors that it's up against, like the Skoda Enyaq, the Tesla Model Y, and also the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which is very closely related to this car. And all of those rivals have recently had fairly substantial alterations to their lineup, which is why it makes perfect sense that it's now the turn of the EV6 to have some tweaks. And aside from the styling changes, probably the biggest change to highlight for this EV6 is in the battery department. So the old 77.4 kilowatt hour battery in the previous models has been replaced by a new 84 kilowatt hour battery. And even though it's bigger, it's actually lighter. And it means the official range of this car has gone up from 328 miles to 361 miles. That is if you go for a rear-wheel drive version of this car. If you go for an all-wheel drive EV6, then the range has changed from 300 miles to 324 miles. There is one key rival which has been launched since the EV6 first went on sale, and that is the Renault Scenic, which is one of the only other electric SUVs that offers a longer official range than this EV6. And in fact, the real-world range of that car is fantastic, and you can find out exactly how far it will go on a charge by clicking on that link at the top of the screen to see that video. But still, even if a Renault Scenic can travel a few miles further than this car, it's clear that range is still a key strength of the EV6. It is also still the case that the EV6 is really impressive when it comes to charging speeds. In fact, it's even quicker than it was before. So previously the maximum charging rate it could accept was 239 kilowatts. Now it's gone up to 258 kilowatts. And that means it can get a 10 to 80% top up in just 18 minutes. Now that is actually exactly the same amount of time as it took in the previous car. But remember now, the battery is a bit bigger. And so because you've got a slightly faster charging speed, it still takes the same amount of time to top this thing up. However, that speed is from a very, very fast public charger, which are still pretty difficult to find. So more likely you'll be plugged into a 50 or a 100 kilowatt charger. And at the lower end of that scale, a 10 to 80% top up takes around 70 minutes. Now let's talk through these interior changes in a bit more detail. So this infotainment system now is still joined to the driver display, as you can see up here, and it's been updated to resemble what you find on the Kia EV9. So now the graphics, the layout is very similar to what you see on that car, and it all looks very crisp, it's really responsive, and it's got a relatively simple layout to things as well. Thankfully, it's not exactly the same as the EV9. So the reason that's good is because on this facelifted EV6, you've still got the climate controls down here on a touch sensitive panel with some physical dials to help easily adjust the main functions that you need to do on the move. And you can also flip this between controlling certain media functions or things like that, or back to the climate control. And the reason that is so good to still see on the EV6 is because with the EV9, that puts its climate controls up on the touchscreen around here, which is very easy to block with the steering wheel and just much more distracting to use while you're driving than the setup that you have on the EV6 down here. But this driving position still isn't perfect though, because just like in the previous car, the top of the steering wheel here can still block quite a big chunk of the driver display. So for me, yes, this driver display looks nice, it's got attractive graphics, but I can't see as much of it as I would like to, which is a shame. Now, you may have noticed that this is a new steering wheel for the EV6, and if you like this two-tone colour scheme for this interior, that is what you get on GT Line and GT Line S models. But whichever EV6 you go for, you will notice some new materials on the interior compared to the previous car. So on the old EV6, you had a lot more gloss black plastics on this interior, which look nice in a showroom, but to live with get really smudgy and dirty very easily, and you're always having to clean them. So now that has all been swapped for these more polished, texturized plastic materials that you can see, especially on the center console and on the door cards here. And to be honest, these new materials look and feel very nice. So that is an upgrade over the previous car. Interior quality has never been a huge strength of the EV6, but these slight changes mean that a decent interior is now a little bit better than it was before. By the way, this infotainment system can now also accept over-the-air updates to the car's control system. So if Kia releases a software update that improves the maximum charging speed or increases the range of the car, then you don't need to visit a dealer to get that upgrade for your car. It can just do it over the air, which is great. Also, you get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto now, and you can have a digital smart key, which essentially turns your smartphone into the key. So it can lock and unlock the car, it can even start the car as well, without you having the physical key on you. Apart from all of that, the basic layout and all the practicality on offer is just the same as it was before. So that means you've got this nice big armrest with a huge cubby underneath it. There's more storage compartments on this center console thing here. There's wireless phone charging if you've got it on your spec of car. And underneath this center console, there's another big storage compartment down there, as well as a couple of handy hooks either side of this as well. So overall, no huge and dramatic changes inside, but the EV6 always had a very good interior, and now it's a bit better. Now, there's been no change to the overall size of the EV6, so in terms of practicality, it's the same as before, which is no problem whatsoever, because in the rear seats, legroom is limo-like. There's tons of it. Headroom isn't quite as generous, but you'd still have to be well over 6 foot tall to feel cramped in terms of headroom. It is certainly open and spacious back here, just as it was before. And even if you want to fit 3 adults side by side, this is a pretty good car to do that in, because this middle seat, even though it's not quite as wide as the outer rear seats, it's still pretty big. And it's also not raised up massively compared to the outer 2 rear seats, so it's not like there's suddenly a huge reduction in headroom. And you've got a nice flat floor as well, so no awkward lump in it that you've got to put your feet either side of. These rear seats can also recline if you want to lay back and relax in a more comfortable sitting position. So rear seat space is still excellent as it was before. If you want 7 seats, you can't get that in an EV6. If you want an electric car with 7 seats, you'd have to look at something like an EV9 or a Peugeot E5008. The boot is the same as before, which means the 490 litre capacity isn't that remarkable considering the fairly big size of this car, but it is still a practical space. And in total, we could fit 7 carry-on size suitcases in the back here, which is the same we could get in the boot of an Audi Q4 e-tron and a Mustang Mach-E for some context. But a Tesla Model Y and an ID.4 are both able to fit more in the boot. But still, there are lots of good things in this EV6 to point out. For a start, the space itself is a useful, simple, square shape. You've got this huge hatchback opening as well. There's also underfloor storage, which stretches right the way back. And you can also prop the boot floor up if you want to access this space underneath without having to have one hand holding the boot floor up, which is handy. There is also a spot to store the parcel shelf, which lots of electric SUVs and lots of cars generally don't give you, so that is very good. And if you want even more space than what's available here, then you can use these release levers to put down the rear seats. You can see they split fold 60/40. So overall, this isn't the outright most practical electric SUV out there, but it is still very good and certainly not small or stingy when it comes to space. There is also a front boot, but as you can see on this all-wheel drive model, the space that you're given is pretty stingy. If you go for a rear-wheel drive model, then it is bigger than this, enough for a couple of small bags of shopping, but still not particularly generous. With the EV6, it isn't just a choice between a rear-wheel drive model or an all-wheel drive one, there is also a choice of 3 different trim levels. And even entry-level EV6 Air models are pretty well equipped with 19-inch alloys, climate control, rain-sensing wipers, heated door mirrors, adaptive cruise control, a heated steering wheel, and heated front seats with adjustable lumbar support for the driver, all offered as standard. In fact, unless you really need an all-wheel drive car, this is the trim level that we go for. Stepping up to GT line trim adds slightly sportier looks, an electrically adjustable driver's seat with relaxation function, privacy glass and wireless phone charging. It's this trim and the one above that's available with all-wheel drive. Range-topping GT Line S gets larger 20-inch alloys, exterior door handles that automatically pop out for you to grab, a head-up display, ventilated front seats and heated outer rear seats. It's very well equipped, but also quite pricey. Whichever version you go for, Kia gives you a fantastic 7-year warranty as standard, which beats all of the rivals that this car is up against. And on top of that, the Korean manufacturer has a brilliant record when it comes to reliability anyway. So, bigger battery, longer range, but on the road, this new EV6 still drives in a very similar way to the previous car. There are 2 versions to choose from still. There's a rear-wheel drive model and one that's all-wheel drive. And if you go for rear-wheel drive, then you have less power but a longer range. This all-wheel drive version we're in now is quicker, but it has a shorter range overall. And really, we would point you towards the rear-wheel drive model because it's the cheapest in the lineup, it's still certainly quick enough, and it has the longest range of any EV6 and one of the longer ranges in the electric SUV class, full stop. Whichever version you go for, you'll get an electric SUV that's always been more on the sporty side than being ultra comfortable and soft. Now we're talking in relative terms here, it's not like this is some incredible supercar to drive with a rock hard brittle ride. Instead, this is decent to drive with accurate, well-weighted steering, decent body control, and a ride that is on the firm side, particularly around town. It can be a little bit thumpy over harsh imperfections, but overall this is still a comfortable car on the road. Now, if you've been driving lots of new cars recently, you may have noticed that every time you get in your car and start it, automatically, if you go over the speed limit, there will be a bong letting you know that you're breaking the speed limit. Now, this has frustrated lots of drivers, and what we're seeing more and more is manufacturers making it simpler to turn off safety functions like that. Now, of course, the point to make is you shouldn't be speeding. Speeding is bad. However, no manufacturer offers perfect speed limit warning technology. So, for example, it's quite common that you could be going 70 miles an hour on the motorway and the car will suddenly decide that you've entered a 20 mile an hour zone and keep bonging at you, warning you that you're breaking the speed limit, when of course you're not. And that is very distracting. And so it's understandable that you'd want to turn that off if you can. And in lots of cars, that involves using the touchscreen, diving into millions of sub-menus and swiping away. But in the EV6, if you want to turn it off, you just hold down the volume button for 3 seconds and it's done. The pricing of the EV6 remains broadly in line with the competitors that this is up against. But if you look at the starting price, then you might assume this is very expensive compared to an Ioniq 5 or a Skoda Enyaq. But bear in mind that with those cars, they are available with a choice of batteries that includes a smaller one with a smaller range. Whereas with the EV6, there's no choice of batteries. You just get one big one with a big range. So the first Kia EV6 was a brilliant electric car, and this new one is as well. The changes are more minor tweaks than anything dramatic, but it helps make this fantastic EV even better. Thanks very much for watching this review. If you want to see another one, then click up there and make sure you subscribe to our channel as well. And if you want to find out more about the EV6 and every other car that this is up against, click on that link to go to whatcar.com.